Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Let's talk about sharing your stories on LinkedIn, one of my favorite topics to talk about. Last time that I unpacked elements of this topic was with Rachel Simon. If you did not check out that episode, I highly recommend you do so. It'll be in the show notes. Pause this episode, go listen to the last episode with Rachel Simon. This episode will make a lot more sense to you. But in the last episode, we unpacked elements of getting over the fear of posting on LinkedIn. We talked about AI and what artificial intelligence will mean regarding content creation. In addition, we talked about how simply posting on social media actually refines our messages. It actually makes us better public speakers. So go check out that episode. But I'm very excited to bring Rachel back. I am unbelievably grateful that she agreed to do another episode. I very much appreciate her time. For those of you who might not be familiar with Rachel, Rachel Simon is the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots Digital, where she focuses on LinkedIn corporate strategy and how companies can utilize the platform with their employees for maximum results. Welcome back, Rachel.
Hi, Matt. Nice to be here.
Thanks again. I appreciate you being here. I love unpacking this stuff with you. I felt like the last time we had met, it was just a very interesting conversation, to say the least, whenever you're talking about AI and getting over fear and public speaking in general, right? It's very interesting, especially since the conversation is a LinkedIn conversation, right? But how in the world do you get to that? And, as you know, Rachel, there's a lot of psychology that goes into marketing, branding, and really building a community, so to speak, on LinkedIn. So I very much appreciate our conversations.
Always. They're always great. I love them too.
Thanks. So I want to dive a little bit deeper. And last time we spoke, we started to touch on the ideas of evergreen content. So I want to explore that a little bit more. And for anyone listening that doesn't know that terminology, or maybe they think they know what it means, but you may have a different definition. Could you just let us know, what is your picture of evergreen content? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I look at evergreen content as those topics that are going to always be a part of your brand narrative, right? So I'll use myself as an example. Evergreen content for me is all going to revolve around, LinkedIn aspects of your LinkedIn profile, right? Headlines, about section. It's going to talk about evergreen content. It's going to be, how do you download your LinkedIn network? What are the elements of creating a content strategy? Because those are always going to be a part of the way I position my brand, my company story, the services that I offer, and whatnot. So what are those pieces that never change and just get refined over time?
I love that. Pieces that never change. And you said get refined over time.
Yeah.
Get refined over time. I love that. And I think people should pay more attention to that, because yes, when we do something initially, we want to continue to refine it and make it better. I mean, isn't that the whole point of business in general, is to continue to deliver paramount value to our clients? I love that. So I'll share with everyone a little secret. And this legitimately is a secret. I do not tell a lot of people this, but I guess everyone's going to know now. So I'm very big on building what I like to refer to as a content machine. Okay. So I talked extensively about story banks on this show, the importance of a story bank, what it is, how to implement it in business. There's an element to it that I refer to as a content machine. And what that is to me is creating such an incredible content machine that it fuels your sales pipeline process. Okay. And I do think that there needs to be a marriage of marketing and sales. It is mind-boggling to me, especially when I go in and speak to different companies, that their marketing department and sales department are at each other's throats. Like, it is mind-boggling to me that there's major competition between those two departments. I mean, there needs to be a marriage of marketing and sales, or you're going to have a hard time in the marketplace for sure. But for me, a content machine, I like to, yes, have new creative thoughts 100%. And when I do have a new thought that pops into my head that has an incredible business theme intertwined, I like to share that. But I also like that evergreen content piece that stays consistent. Okay. So if you were to see my content machine, my content bank, you would see tons and tons and tons and tons of content pieces that would be considered evergreen content, back to your point, Rachel. And some of that stuff doesn't change. Here's the beauty of it. There are things that happen every single year that should not come as a surprise to people. Okay. They just shouldn't, right? Like for me, my wife's birthday comes the same time every year. So guess what? On my wife's birthday, I post a story about how she helped me in business. That's a piece of my evergreen content. Every year, for people that follow me, you will know on my wife's birthday, you will see a story regarding how she helped me in business. This also is really important to recognize regarding holidays, right? On the last episode, we were talking how we met up in Atlanta. Martin Luther King Jr., the day happens every year. He was born in Atlanta. I had the opportunity to check out his childhood home. I literally stood in the room that MLK was born in. That is a part of my evergreen content. I love sharing that. I learned a ton from MLK. It's from a sheer public speaking perspective over the years that I've used in numerous different stories. So that goes in my content bank, my content machine that I've created as an evergreen piece. And leaders are missing out on that. Think about all the stories they could be building out their content machine with evergreen content pieces that happen over and over and over again.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. And again, let's just think about it from a really simple and achievable way. So, I recommend when I'm working with clients and they're just getting started with content to post 4 times a month, 1 post a week. Because people get overwhelmed with this idea of posting content. But when I ask them, can you think of 4 things to talk about in a month? They're like, oh, 4 things. That's not so overwhelming. And almost always one of those 4 things is something like what you're talking about. It's a holiday. It's an annual whatever. It's, if you're organization, if you're a nonprofit, it's whatever that day that relates to your mission that comes across every year, right? So there's going to be one of those 4 things in almost every single month that you can pull right from the calendar. And then you can use it again the next year and just tweak it a little bit. So it should be able to break that down. And if you can think of one of the 4 things as evergreen, then maybe one of the other content topics is something related specifically to what your business does. And you can continue to refine that over time. And the thing about LinkedIn that's pretty nice is that unlike, as much as I love Facebook memories because they're delightful when I see these hilarious things that I posted 10 years ago of my kids. LinkedIn doesn't send us memories. They're not sending us, hey, Matt posted this a year ago today, remember? So nobody remembers what you posted 6 months ago, let alone a year ago. Just reuse that content and just change it up a little bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about the numbers that you just laid out for us. So you said 4 times a month, which obviously equates to once a week. And I like that you mentioned that typically one of those 4 tends to be an evergreen content piece. Okay, so I want everyone to think about the math with that is that over time, that's how you build out this amazing content machine that I'm referring to. So in the last episode with Rachel, I had mentioned, actually, Rachel, you mentioned it too, that you started getting active and I started getting active in late of 2019. For me, it was September of 2019. So I've had 2020, 2020, 21, 22. I've had 3 years of building out my content machine. So now all that evergreen content pouring in. So for me, and yes, I don't want to scare people 4 times a month. I think that's a great place to start. I definitely take Rachel's recommendation. But for me, it's inconceivable for me now that low of an amount because of all the content that I built out, and people will get there too. If they take Rachel's advice and they keep working it, they're going to start to build that content. And this is going to lead to even building a better company culture. So for every C-suite leader that is listening to this, think about everything that happens that your team members get excited about. One of the things that pops into my head, I don't know why this is popping into my head, I just think it's something that is an evergreen content piece, is that bring your son and daughter to work day. Okay. It happens every year. What a great way to capture that moment. And now you can use that moment again and again and again. You can talk about comparisons where your team has grown. You can highlight certain team members that obviously you need to get permission if children are involved in these posts, but there's so much that can build from that. So for me personally, I have a post ready to go on bring your son and daughter to work day. Boom. It's a picture of my family. It's how I bring them into my business goals. Like that is a piece of evergreen content that I would miss out on if I didn't start the work now to build that out. So have you seen that
Absolutely.
as well, Rachel? Like what else can leaders do regarding that?
Yeah, I think thinking about what are those pieces that, again, do happen every year. So company milestones, anniversaries. Um, you know, my company celebrated its fifth birthday in the beginning of 2023, and I posted about it. And, that is content that people get excited about. They want to celebrate your wins. They want to be like, that's amazing. Congratulations. Lots of small businesses don't make it that far. So, what's a company milestone that you could share that happens every single year? Or maybe it's beefing up your team, right? And everyone loves a shout out. I mean, evergreen content doesn't have to be recycling the same post. It might be every the first Tuesday of the month, I always do a shout out to one of my team members to show how much I appreciate them. Celebrating successes, supporting wins. And there's just an endless number of things that can be in there. Shouting out clients, client wins, case studies. I mean, but not just sharing a boring case study, like tell a story with it. But thinking about what are all the various things you want to be pushing out, and then, plan it and think about where you can pop in that content that does come up again and again in your plan.
I love that. And congratulations on the 5 years. That's amazing. And also think that you can tweak that for year 6, right? You can literally take the same thing, tweak it, and then people are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's incredibly well written. But it might have taken you 2 seconds the next time around because you already have it written. That's the beauty of it. And I always found this amazing. I love studying, especially incredible orators. I love unpacking elements of whether they were former presidents or even top CEOs that they could just get up on stage and they could really capture an audience. A lot of that goes back to writing. And if you've ever read books about famous CEOs and former presidents, they take copious notes. They're constantly writing. It refines their skill set regarding connecting. Same thing is true with the content that we're posting. The more you post, the more you write, the more you're going to refine. I'm almost bewildered when I'll go in and I'll talk to executives, and they always talk about how agonizing it is to write and how, man, they don't want to go to that meeting and try to motivate people. Well, one, they're not motivated themselves, which is a whole other topic of conversation and a red flag. But if they're struggling to write, they're struggling because it's not part of their habit. Once you continue to do this, it gets easier and easier and easier, and you refine those skills. My youngest son, who's learning to ride a bike right now, one day he'll be doing the tricks on the bike, but he needs to get on the bike and ride it to start. And there's so many C-suite that they fail miserably when it comes to writing. And then they wonder why they can't have an engaging talk in meetings. And it's so frightening for them. Well, part of it is what better way to get out there time and time again by focusing on these pieces that we're talking about, just starting with the 4 a month. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny. I always think about, and I'm glad you brought up sort of the frustration piece. And I have a list of post topic ideas that I keep just so I don't forget them, because sometimes ideas pop into your head and then you lose them. And one of the topics I've just had on my list for a while is the power of frustration, right? And it's something I think that we kids are really good at it. Otherwise, no one would ever learn how to walk. I mean, remember watching your kids learn how to walk, and they stand up and they fall down, and then they stand up again and they fall down, or they fall flat on their face and they cry, and then they try again. And I think as adults, we forget that frustration is actually really motivating and we learn a lot from it. So that, yes, putting out content that doesn't land, it is super frustrating. But what can we learn from that so that the next time it's a little bit more successful and we feel a little bit more confident with what we're putting out to our audience?
Yeah, I love that power of frustration. I think it ties into something that you've mentioned to me about the importance of showing up, right? And even kind of leaning into that frustration and showing up again and again, even if you're not seeing instant results. So do you just want to talk about just the sheer importance of showing up?
Yeah. I mean, like your listenership, I'm sure they're all amazing people, but we're all really easy to forget if we don't remind people that we exist. To be like,
Sure.
hey, remember me? And that this happens all the time, where someone will come across one of your social media feeds, whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever you spend time, and you're like, oh my God, I totally forgot about that person. Uh, it's because you're just not seeing them every day. It's really hard to forget about somebody when you see them all the time. So the more you show up, whether that is, again, posting your weekly post and then logging onto LinkedIn and doing and commenting on other people's content, that's a great way to show up without having to create content every single day. Because for a lot of us, and I am not in that category, I give you a tremendous amount of credit for being able to post every day. But you can still show up on LinkedIn consistently by posting once a week and by commenting a lot. And people will remember you. You want to be top of mind. You don't want to be forgotten because you've disappeared off of the news feed. And so just that simple way of being like, hello, here I am. So that when the best thing to me is when I have people come up to me, I meet like in the real world, and they're like, oh, I see you all the time on LinkedIn. I'm like, awesome. That's
That's
great.
amazing. That's awesome. I love that. And what better way to warm prospects up than showing up? Like that ties in that sales pipeline piece that we were talking about. Like there are a lot of teams out there that their leaders aren't thinking enough about this, where they're still doing old archaic marketing practices, where they could be doing content pieces and something as simple as just commenting on a prospect's post, starting the conversation. I'm not saying comment and then, pitch them, but commenting, starting to build somewhat of a relationship and then tying them into what you do. There's so much missed opportunity in that regard across the country with companies that they're not empowering their sales teams to do this. That all goes back to showing up again and again and the marriage of marketing and sales.
Yeah. And what is it like? You have to like touch somebody's, like get in front of them like 10 times before they're ready to move to the next step in I can't, there's stats are all around there about like how many touch points it takes. Well, LinkedIn is a constant way to be getting in front of people if you do it the right way, right? We're not pitching them in the DMs. We are putting out content that is relevant and relatable and commenting in a meaningful way to the people who we want to be seen by. And, this is a strategy that works great if you're trying to sell your product or service, or you're a job seeker. There's a company you want to work for. Start commenting on the posts of people that work for that company. There's a prospect that you want to be working with. You want to sell, you want them to buy your services. Start engaging with their content. so that when you do send them a connection request, they know who you are already. It's very easy for them to say, of course, I'm going to connect with Matt. He always comments on my posts, and I really appreciate that.
And there's so much strategy you could build around this. You know, just to use your example of someone looking for a new position or a career advancement, imagine they comment on someone's post again and again and again, not in a creepy, weird way, but just consistently. They have that curiosity. They start more of a back and forth of engagement. And then a few weeks later, they say, hey, do you mind hopping on a 15-minute call? I'd love to talk more about your company, learn more about what you have going on. They get on the call and it's, hey, do you know who the hiring manager is for this one position? I really appreciate seeing about your culture. I think I'd be a good fit. And then they make that connection. Like there is a lot of legitimacy to the strategy of that. Instead of picking up the phone and blindly calling a company or putting in a resume that's not even probably going to get read, there's a lot of strategy regarding what you're saying, Rachel. So I very much appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad always used to say, it's who you know. Right? He was a big network guy, and the beauty is on LinkedIn, it's that we actually have a lot of power to do that for ourselves, right? We can create that ability to be the person that people want to know by simply showing up consistently.
100%. And I love the consistency. I also like talking about the intentionality behind it. I don't want that to get missed. I do think there's a difference between passion versus profit. What I mean by that is there is a little bit of a psychological game. Well, not a little bit, a lot that I want people to recognize. So obviously LinkedIn is in the business of making money. So they will do everything they possibly can to protect their entity. They are very focused on tweaking the algorithm that fits their needs, and rightly so, right? They're in business. With that said, what ends up happening is people start getting sucked into the dopamine hit where they just start randomly posting or commenting to get that spike of dopamine. There's a ton of research surrounding social media and dopamine that I could direct people to. If you're interested, shoot me a message and I'll send you all kinds of material regarding the psychology of social media. So the danger in this is getting sucked into the I need this to make me feel better, stroke my ego. I mean, fill in whatever you want. And they get away from strategy. And that could hurt credibility. It could hurt their brand. So I do want people to be mindful of this. I want them to be intentional. They need to make sure it doesn't really tie into who they are, their brand. Does it really tie into the authenticity? We talked about AI on the last episode that we did. I mean, you could use AI to crank out all kinds of content pieces for you that have nothing to do with your industry, with what you do, with for content putting out in the world perspective, it's great, but does it really tie into your mission, your values, your beliefs? So that's what I would challenge everyone listening to really evaluate is what kind of strategy are you bringing to the table? If you truly want to bring in business, you have to have a strategy surrounding it.
Yeah, I think that people do get sucked into we like to refer to them as vanity metrics, right? Oh, I got 10,000 views on my post. But, you know, what does that actually mean? I mean, we definitely want to get eyeballs on our content, but I'd rather get meaningful comments from people who potentially can either be referral partners or targets for me than have just a bunch of views of random people that are never going to be my customer. So you're really thinking about what's most important to you when it comes to the way your content is delivering, and what people kind of are always looking for the easy button. That's why they lean into tools like AI. They, do things like engagement pods, where people are all buying into a group and agreeing to comment on each other's posts. While that might get you a lot of views on your posts, it's not necessarily getting you the right views. So really thinking about how do you balance those two. And I think the passion and the profit is a good way of doing it, right? We don't want to just willy-nilly put stuff out there. It needs to be for a specific purpose, and be within your brand. I mean, you and I have lots of great LinkedIn friends in common, and then they, like Michelle Griffin, who, she's like always comes top of mind when it comes to branding for me. And, it has to be within your brand. Otherwise, it confuses people. You don't want to be confusing. It would be like if Coke suddenly had a can that was blue. Is this Pepsi? But it has the Coke logo. I don't understand. Which is it?
For sure. Yeah. And it kind of goes into almost the popularity content piece. And I see this more and more where people are so into the followership. And I do think there's something to be said about it showing relevance, but at some point, it could really get people away from what they need to be doing. The popularity content, it almost like reminds me of like high school where you have certain tables and who's the most popular. And it's like, is that really getting you what you want business wise? And I see this all the time, especially with current events. And I want people to really recognize this and grab a hold of it. Just because something's happening news wise doesn't necessarily mean you need to talk about it, because it might not tie into your brand. It might not tie into anything. I see this all the time with people where they will jump on a bandwagon and they will post something, they'll share a story, but that story doesn't actually connect to their target market. And that is a really dangerous game to play. It causes confusion. Like you said, that blue Coke can just causes a lot of brand confusion. So highly recommend people focus on the strategy.
Yeah, I think sometimes getting, and I mean, I see this all the time too. Companies feel like something big is happening, newsworthy, and I need to. I have. It's going to look bad if I don't say something. But sometimes, depending on what that thing is, it may not be helping you to say something. You can support things that are happening in the world, current events wise, in other ways, right? You can comment on other people's content. You can share a news story. But sometimes it's better just to take a step back and be quiet and read.
For sure. For sure. So I won't give specific examples, but I did see a company several months ago share a story of a celebrity that unexpectedly passed away. The way they shared the story and the details of it, I can tell you based on what I know, did not connect to their prospects in any way, shape, or form. And I have to think someone thought it was appropriate to jump on the bandwagon of this is what everyone's talking about, this one celebrity that unfortunately passed away. We need to put out this statement. It had nothing to do with their industry. It had no relevance whatsoever to the product or service. I can guarantee you it didn't connect to their prospect, especially based on some of the comments that I read. So storytelling is unbelievably powerful. It can also be dangerous because of its heightened sense of power. You need to make sure that your words are truly connecting with your target audience. So I appreciate you sharing that, Rachel.
Yeah. And I think that gets into the balancing those two things, because while jumping on the bandwagon of something trending might get you eyeballs, again, those aren't always necessarily the right ones or are going to serve you in the long term. So it's just like really thinking about what makes the most sense for me. If I am showing up consistently, and let's say I am doing 4 posts a month, I want to use those really strategically as I start to build up my content bank and my confidence in posting. And I think that those two pieces go hand in hand, right? We're building up the content that we have, that we are creating. And the more we post, the more confident we are in putting it out there.
Yeah, that's really important, that strategic aspect. I was actually unpacking this with a mutual friend, Erin Geiger, not too long ago. You mentioned that you were actually on her podcast. Highly recommend that. I had the opportunity to go on her podcast. It was a lot of fun. She is masterful at copywriting and writing in general. And I used to throw out this term ICP all the time, ICP, ideal client persona. She actually pushed me to stretch beyond that. She added a C. So it's ICP/C, ideal client persona/community. So the stories that we're sharing, are we actually sharing them strategically, back to your point, Rachel, to our community? What I saw regarding this one post I'm talking about was it didn't connect to the community. So I'll give a very real example that I'm sure a lot of people might recognize. I'm not belittling this person. Obviously, this person is in many ways a marketing genius. this individual has done masterfully well when it comes to social media. So the person I'm referring to is Gary Vaynerchuk. Phenomenal. I've read his books. There's a lot that could be said about him, good, bad, ugly, multiple different ways. Gary Vaynerchuk, though I personally view him as a marketing genius in many ways, I feel like he has dominated the social media space in a big, big way. He does not communicate to my target community. Okay. So my community, my ICP/C would be more readers of Seth Godin and Malcolm Gladwell. That's really important for me to recognize, because if I start talking like Gary Vaynerchuk and I start sharing stories like Gary V, that's going to alienate my audience. So we need to be very cognizant of, does this topic really tie into the stories we want to be sharing?
I think that's a really, really great example, because there are creators that have massive followings that just don't speak to every audience. And I mean, Gary Vee is a great one. I've never been found a way, an entry point into his content. It just doesn't do anything for me. I recognize that he's got a massive following and is hugely successful, but I would fall into that category of, I'm not his audience, and that's fine. So if I suddenly started, using him as an example of the kind of content and the content style to share, that would be inauthentic with who I am.
So I appreciate you mentioning that. I'm actually laughing because I recently had a conversation. I was talking about PR with someone, and this person, she actually said to me, she said, don't fall into the Gary V trap. And what she had said was exactly back to your point. Sometimes we see someone doing exceptionally well. They have a huge, massive, mind-boggling, if you will, audience and following to back up what they're doing. But the Gary V trap was, she said, if I started talking like Gary V, my whole business would collapse. She's like, I can't get on stage and start throwing out F-bombs and start being bombastic in my communication. So we have to know the community we're trying to speak to.
Absolutely. It's so funny. I'm in a networking group, and the guy who runs it is basically every other word out of his mouth is the F word. That's just his brand. That's who he is. And so when I try to recruit people to come into to check out a meeting, it's a great group, awesome business leaders, lots of small business owners. I always kind of give them that caveat. If you have a problem with profanity, this is not the place for you.
Sure.
I mean, and it's a good way of thinking about it, is that everybody isn't going to resonate with everyone. So be who you are and authentically put yourself out there, because what is that phrase? Your vibe is your tribe. Like you're gonna attract the people who get you authentically by just showing up as yourself.
Sure. No, I really, really appreciate mentioning that. That is so, so important to recognize, for sure. Again, I very much appreciate your time. I do want to be respectful of your time. I know you have a lot going on. So thank you again. A lot that we can pull from this episode, from this conversation. I think there were 3 specific ones that stood out to me that I don't want to be lost with everyone listening. Is the first thing is, right out of the gate, you talked about that evergreen content piece, and really it becomes part of your signature stories. You had mentioned you want the evergreen content to be part of your narrative. You want to continue to tweak it, but you want it to be pieces of who you are, right? You could still refine it, but it's really part of who you are. The second thing I took away was just the element of strategically setting aside 4 times a month, which obviously equates to once a week, and just starting the process. Because as you do that, based on what you said, Rachel, people will quickly find that typically 1 out of those 4 pieces are evergreen content pieces that they could start to build out their content bank with. And then the third piece, I just really appreciate the verbiage of power of frustration. Doing it anyway. Sometimes we get frustrated, but we just need to do it anyway and continue to show up. And as we show up, focus on our community. So all in all, I got a ton out of this, Rachel. Thank you again for your time. I very much appreciate it. If anyone wants to get more information on you and what you do, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Just put stories with traction in your message so I know where you came across my profile. And I'm always happy to engage with fans of the Stories with Traction podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll have that in the show notes. Super convenient. People could just click connect with you, Rachel. Highly recommend people check out Rachel's content. It is extremely helpful, especially if you're just starting out with the 4 times a month. It's going to be helpful to follow Rachel. And even if you've been in the content game, so to speak, for quite some time, she could help you refine your message, help you more strategically as well. So highly recommend that. I'll put that in the show notes. And again, thank you, Rachel. I very much appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.